This is a story about the Rolling Stones, one of the first times they came to Vancouver. I thought it was the first, but they came actually quite a few times when they first got famous, because another guy told me that he'd seen them once too. And so anyway, I met the Rolling Stones once. I actually talked to them for a short while. The story goes, it was December the 1st, 1965. I think that was the show. I was a drummer in a band called The Questions. The band was started by Frank Babakayev, who was from Salmon Arms, Sicamous, and played in bands from the Okanagan. One of these bands was the Shadracks. The other one was, I think, called the High Fives from Salmon Arm. The Questions had Rick McCarty, vocalist, Frank Babakayev, vocal, lead guitar, and songwriting, Adrie Van Viersen, bass guitar, Rick Coleman, keyboards, Dave Camo, sax, and myself on drums. As the story goes, we heard the Rolling Stones were coming to town. We were big fans of their music. We didn't have tickets for some reason. Maybe they'd sold out before we could get them. We decided to go down, me and Frank Babakayev, to go down and see the spectacle anyway, because it would be so exciting, you see. The Stones were performing at the Agrodome in Vancouver, BC, and we knew there would be a lot of action around the event. The other acts on the show at the time were Merrily Rush and the Turnabouts from Seattle area, and the Coasters, the old band that they had a lot of hits. Can't think of one right now, but they have a lot of them. Just look them up. Frank and I went down before the show to mill around like all the other fans, and there were a few hundred, mostly young girls, hanging around the back of the Agrodome, waiting in anticipation, thinking they would see the Rolling Stones come in. They figured the Stones would come in the back doors because the front of the building was packed at the entrance with fans who had tickets. Frank and I hung around with the rest of the people at the back of the building to see if we could get a glimpse of the Stones. Frank noticed the Agrodome was joined to another building by an above-ground passageway. It was called the Livestock Barns, the other building. This was used to keep the animals in before bringing them to the Agrodome for shows. They have them at the PNE there. The Livestock Barn building had a big open area and stalls to keep the animals before a show. There were a lot of fans where we were at the back of the Agrodome, so Frank suggested we go to the Livestock Barn because he had an idea they would bring in the Stones in there to avoid the crowd and come through the tunnel. Well, that's true. It really paid off. We went next door and stood there waiting, and there, just in a couple of minutes later, we were at the back door of the barn. The limousine drove up right in front of us, and out came the Rolling Stones. We were standing by the door, so they walked right up by us toward the door. Mick Jagger said hi to us, and some of the other members, Brian Jones, and me and Frank said, "Oh, hi, guys." We were so thrilled. The Stones went in, and the door closed. Well, we thought, gee, that was great. And so Frank suggested, he was the instigator, we should go around the front of the barn, the building where the Stones went in. He was smart. When we got around the front of the building, we noticed there was a ladder leading up to the hayloft for there was a hayloft that they would keep hay for the animals, right? And so, being young and brave, we decided to climb up and sneak into the loft, down into the building. So no one was in the front of the building, of the barn building, so we climbed up the ladder, opened the loft door, and I guess it was latched shut, but we got in. I remember the ladder was way off the ground, so I boosted Frank up first, and then he helped me get up. I guess they didn't expect anyone to even try to enter the building that way, because there was really nothing in it except pens for animals. I'm sure the loft nowadays it would be locked, but I don't know, it wasn't locked then. Maybe it had a lock back then, but we jimmied it open, I can't remember. Anyway, we got into the loft, shut the door, and made our way to a trap door where there was a ladder down into the main floor. So we crawled along up top where the hay was, and I found a way to get downstairs. We got, and then we climbed down to the bottom, to the big area, and there were the Rolling Stones standing. They'd brought the limousine in somehow, by another door, I guess. they were standing by the limousine. It had driven into the building, and they were standing around the back with their manager and an escort at the back door. It had been done to fool the crowd, you see. And they were standing at the back of the limousine, all standing around. They had really neat clothes on, I remember that. And we walked right up to the Stones, who were standing around the back of the limousine. They all were there and greeted Frank and I. They remembered us from the front door. I remember Keith Richards, Brian Jones, Bill Wyman had their guitars with them, and they'd gotten out of the trunk. The trunk was open where they'd kept their guitars, you see. And they were very friendly to us, and we introduced ourselves and said we were, started talking about music and said we were in a band called The Questions, and we loved their music. And I remember vividly as the cool English rock clothes they had, and the main thing was how small they were. They were like little thin English people. Another thing was how cool-looking Brian Jones was at the time. He looked different than the rest because of his blonde hair, and he dressed really neat. We started talking to him. We were talking about, 5 minutes, when their manager came back and noticed us talking to him and called the security over to arrest us, which they did. So anyway, we said goodbye to the Stones and tell them to have a good show. And then they couldn't open the doors to throw us out of the building because there's too many fans around the building at the time. So the security guys, whoever they were, I guess Vancouver Police or building security, took us to the above-ground tunnel and put us in one of the animal pens that had a door with bars on it, sort of like a jail. I guess for the bulls or something, I don't know. Well, it turns out we were right near the entrance of the Agrodome where the stage was. When the show started, each act came walking right by us, and we're laughing and joking. We got special notice and attention because they thought it was hilarious to see Frank and I shut up in the animal pen. But the pen we were in was clean anyway. They only use them at the shows at the PNE when they have the PNE on. So we got to say hello and talk to each act as they were waiting there to get announced to go on stage. We got to meet Marilee and the Turnabouts and the Coasters, and when the Stones came by, we talked to them. We talked to them for a little bit before the show started. So we talked to them when we first behind the building, when we said hello. When we got in the building, we talked to them behind their limo, and then we talked to them when they were waiting to go on stage. And then we talked to them when they said goodbye and left. They were in a hurry when they were leaving, but it was great to hear each act to do their short show because the fans wanted the Stones, of course. I remember the Stones playing Route 66 to start the show off, and Satisfaction, they played that too. Bam, 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 bam. But Route 66, they did a good version of that. Crowd was screaming so loud. We were fairly close to the stage. We could hear great. We were like front row seats, only except we couldn't see them. I remember the Coasters stopped and talked to us a bit after their set. They went on second. Marilee went on. They went on first. They I can't remember if they talked to us or not. After the show, there was pandemonium and chaos as the Rolling Stones were ushered by us very fast, but managed to yell something on the way. We were yelling praises to them. They were the Stones were escorted to their limousine inside the barn, I guess, where we'd met them, and went out by some door where the limousine had come in the first place. I guess when they arrived, they wanted the limousine empty to bring into the building because after they dropped the Stones off at the back door, the crowd had seen it and started swarming it. But it was empty now, and the Stones had been let out and got in their limousine and took off somehow. I guess the same way they brought the limo in. Well, after the show was over, the Rolling Stones and the other acts left the building. The security people came up and let us go. They were very nice to us and admired our ingenuity in getting into the building to meet the bands. In all, it was a great night and a special time in my life. Frank went on to... that's another story about going to New Zealand together and Anyway.